Hello everyone. The first and foremost step of the examination is to select the right optional. So I would try to decipher that which optional should we select and what should be the criteria of selecting our optional. So this is the general way in which we'll understand it, but I'll focus my discussion entirely on the political science and international relations, that why one should take PSIR as one of the optional to appear in this examination. If you see the strategy of selecting an optional in the examination, the very first thing that everybody asks is that what should be our first criteria of selecting the optional. So if we go and refer to this question of trying to understand the criteria of selecting optional, the most important point here is that you should always choose an optional which you have read in your graduation or in your post or in the post graduation. So with the same point in mind, the first thing that comes to our mind is that students do ask that if we see that the optional that we have selected, do we have to still focus upon the point that is the optional relevant for us or helpful for us in preparing ourselves for the general studies part of the examination. So this is also a very important point where the student always have to focus on this aspect, that you can ask these questions to yourself, that is the optional useful for general studies. That's the second criteria that we have to focus on. So A, what we have studied before as part of our training as student in the graduation and post graduation, and B, we also have to focus upon the fact that is the subject really useful or helpful for preparing you for the examination in a better manner. Specifically, does the subject overlaps with the general studies segment of the examination? Thirdly, and this is a very pertinent point which you should always keep in mind, because the time and effort is very crucial for the preparation of your examination, because you are actually devoting a very precious time of your life preparing for this examination. So how much time do you need to devote to prepare your optional, and how much of an effort is required to prepare the optional? So that's like time and effort. So generally the students tend to ask that can we prepare this optional in a lesser time or in a lesser effort? So most often than not, we get these kind of questions from the students in terms of their inquiry. The second is that you always have to be very particular about the popularity of the subject. So when I say popularity of the subject, it means that you have to find out that has the subject been doing well as far as the results concerning the examination is concerned. So if you have a better ratio of student taking up the optional and the students passing the examination, which would directly mean that there is a proportional representation, there is a proportional relation that you could create between the students opting for the paper and the student passing the examination. So I would again say that if you say that the subject is popular, it would mean that the subject is faring well in the examination as far as the result or success in the examination is concerned. So if you have these particular questions in mind and the reply to most of this question is yes, then you have to go for that optional. Okay, so generally speaking, I would say that when you are first trying yourself to know that which is the right optional for you, then more often than not, these are the questions that comes to a student's mind. and the students tend to be confused with regards to the list of options that one has to select to appear in the examination. So I would say that first and foremost, try to figure out that if you say yes to all these questions, it's a good way to move ahead for the examination. Okay. Now, with PSIR, if I say that, do I need to be a graduate in the discipline if I have to opt for a PSIR, Political Science and International Relations? So, is PSIR such a course where I need some special skills? So, the answer is actually no. So, it's a myth that one has, that one should be quite at home in if one is preparing for the PSIR optional, because PSIR does not require any special kind of skill. And more often than not, because the PSIR and its syllabus has a huge overlap with your general studies portion, that even if you are not opting for PSIR, the student tend to read so many issues, so many subjects, so many areas that are part of the reading in the Political Science and International Relations syllabus of the optional subject. So what I am trying to say is that if you just discount these particular question, that if I'm not a graduate or if I'm not a postgraduate in PSIR, so would it be difficult for me to opt for this paper? So I would say that it won't be difficult, because for PSIR, you do not require any special skills. It's not a specialized paper, so to say, or it's not a paper which requires some kind of a skill. Okay. So what I would say is that the nature of the paper is such that more than being a specialized paper, it's more generalized. That is why so many aspects of the paper is read also in the general studies portion. Secondly, if I take this discussion forward, one has to be very sure about your option that you are selecting, and if you are selecting the PSIR as an optional, then do you have a ready availability of study material? So, a study material would mean that do you have standard books available? Do you have standards, ready-made study materials available which are very standard in nature? So that may be of benefit to you while you are preparing for the examination, because even if you would select an optional, and if that optional will have paucity of study material, then it would be a hiccup, a hindrance as far as the preparation of the examination is concerned. So I would say that you also have to look at these elements whereby you are talking about the availability of the study material of the subject concerned. Then, as I said, that you are saying that you are asking these questions, that is the optional useful for general studies? So what I would say is that you ask yourself that whatever I'll study in my optional, is it going to be helpful for me while I appear in my general studies paper as well? So definitely that has to be kept in mind. So that, I would say, is the safer limit of the optional. But having said all this, there is a very, very pertinent point that I wish to make, and that is that whatever optional you chooses, you should be interested in that optional. There should be an interest that one should have. Interest means that you should have that spark within yourself to actually have the interest within yourself to read the subject over and over again. Because see, if you have decided to take an optional, then you have to now devote your time period of the entire preparatory phase of your career into that optional. So you should have to have interest in reading that optional, or rather I should say you should have love with that optional. Because if you do not have interest with the optional, then what you would tend to do is you would actually make a choice of the optional, but once you start reading it, you will be bored by that optional, and then you will not be able to read it for the amount of time that is required for the examination, because this examination would require you to read your optional over and over again. So if you want to read, if you have the interest, only then you'll be able to read as many times as possible. Otherwise, boredom would creep in and you would just not be able to read the optional. So in those moments, the optional may become very suffocating for the students. So you have to be very, very clear in your choice. If you are opting for an optional, then you should really like that optional, which means you should love reading that optional. That optional should be of interest to you, so that when you are reading that optional, you are not bored by the optional, and then if you have to read it so many times, you are able to do it, with ease, because that's what will make you click with the optional. Else, the optional becomes a bit cumbersome. It's like you are walking, but you are tied with a heavier stone on your neck. So it will not allow you a more freer movement. So you need to move freely. So that needs to be like, you should be just doing away with all the cobwebs in your mind, so that you are very clear that you really like the discipline and you love reading the syllabus. So what you need to do, if you are still confused about it, then you should have decided something. Then the best part is that you should just go back. So if there are like two optionals in which you are a bit confused, so the best strategy is go through their previous year's questions. So I would say go through their last 3 years questions and just try to see that which questions are more comfortable to you, which means in which question you make more sense, in which question after reading you think that you have read something on it, or you think that you will be in a position to be able to prepare yourself to answer these questions. So if you are comfortable with those line of thought where you think that we'll be able to do it, I think I'm more familiar with subject A over subject B, when you are comparing the two, then opt for the subject in which you are more familiar. So that's what I would say is going to be your guidance for selecting the optional. Because as I said, last but not the least, this interest part again is very important for me, because having said everything, if you fulfill all the conditions and when you start reading the optional and you are not interested, then we'll again come back to square one. That should not be done. And as a utilitarian, we should always ask ourselves this question, that if I am opting something, is it very useful for me as far as the examination is concerned? And there you can say that the utilitarian part comes where you see that what percentage of students who have opted have really been successful with this paper in the examination. And if you see that there is a larger portion of success that is for the students who have opted this paper in the examination, then I think you can actually start preparing for that paper and you are good to go with that paper as an optional subject. So this was like more a very generalized way to ascertain that how do you make a choice as far as the optional paper is concerned. So now I want to actually focus on the paper that I teach over here and in Drishti, and that is the political science and international relation. So, why choose political science and international relations as an optional paper? So I would say the very first thing that everybody should keep in mind with PSIR is that it is such a paper where you are trying to understand about politics, So, and politics is something which is concerned with day-to-day affairs, of our lives. So, for example, if I say that something has happened in Pahalgaon, and that incident can have an impact in the Indo-Pak relation. So this is something which is an occurrence that we know even if you are not reading political science. But if reading that and relating that incident and then connecting it with the foreign policy and India-Pakistan bilateral relation can be handy for me to prepare for an optional paper, then what I am trying to say is that it is something which you read every day, which you are aware about every day because you watch a news channel, you read something in the newspaper, you read a political magazine. So actually what you are doing is, what you are reading it, that you are reading something which is part of political science, because you are actually reading about the day-to-day governance, the day-to-day administration, and the day-to-day affairs of both the individual as well as the society, as well as the state. So, actually in politics, the larger focus is on how do people actually seek to govern themselves. Seek to govern themselves means how are people managing their common problems. And that is where politics plays a very crucial role. So how am I able to manage my common societal problems? How am I able to make decisions and solve my common problems? So this is something which the systematic study of politics helps us to ascertain, helps us to know. And that is what we are going to study over here. What we read actually is, we actually read about government. So when I say government, so there may be so many governmental institutions that we have to read. Okay. So how they play a crucial role, as far as the decision making is concerned. Then we are also going to read about the political processes. So party system, how parties have evolved over the years. We are reading about the processes as well. And then you are also reading about the political institutions, the political system. So what you read around here is that you read about so many aspects of governance, decision making, political processes, and this enhances your ability to understand that how you can apply whatever you have studied to understand that how problems and common problems are resolved in a society. So if you are a political scientist, is like more interested in knowing that how a government is structured. So how a government is structured, how decisions are made, how do I manage conflicts in society. So if you look at the state is always acting as one of the main institutions to manage social conflict, because in a society you can have so many different types of demand that may emerge from different sections of the population. But ultimately, how do you resolve your problem? So in a democratic society, we say not through violence, but it is the state that intervenes. So though sometimes the political parties would take up those demands from the society and try to put forward those demands through their policies, their laws, by amending the constitution. Or rather you could say that the institutions of the state like judiciary, they would come to our rescue and try to resolve our problems that we may be having. So even states and its institutions may have conflicts. So where do you resolve all of this? Through the institutions of the state itself. So state, actually the structures of the government, they are the ones who are doing so many work that we need to study. So A, they are taking decisions. B, they are also interfering and trying to resolve the conflicts that we have in the society. But not only this is only one aspect of our study, that we are studying about government, its institution, the political processes, or rather I should say we also study a bit on the constitution. But we should also know in political science that how one government is related with other government, which means I am talking about relations, that is relations among nations. So that is also a crucial area of this study which a political scientist is always interested in. Okay. So, and then as a political scientist, we are also interested into understanding the philosophical inquiry of how a society should be organized, what sort of political order and power should be assigned to those political order, how do rights and liberties should be given to the people, how would they be safeguarded, how one sort of a political philosophy is different from the other sort of political philosophy. So what I'm trying to say is that one more important thing that we always try to read in political science is an inquiry between the government, that is relationship between government and people. So how do you establish that relationship? And there are multiple opinions with regards to it, that how individual and government should be related so that it leads to, the evolution of a common good. So there are political ideologies and they are supporting different sort of relation between the people and the state. And that is where we see the evolution of different types of state, different types of ideology, and also one philosopher versus the other who are actually putting forward their philosophical arguments with regards to individual liberty, with regards to organization of power, with regards to organization of state. And that remains the core area of philosophy, that we deal in political science. Okay. So why political science is important for us to read? So even if like somebody wants to opt this paper with zero exposure to political science, so should we allow him to take these discipline? So as I have already pointed this out when I started the discussion, that it is not a paper which is very technical by any means. So a guidance which is going to give you all these explanations in a lucid, easy, logical manner that can easily make things discernible to you. So there's no way in which you have to think that this subject and the option that you would opt for the subject should be dealt with a very technical kind of an argument. So people can opt it freely, and then you have to take into consideration all the other aspects that one should make and one should be well versed with while making a choice for selecting their optional. So politics is always interested into a very, very fundamental element, that is, who gets how much power, why does he get that power, and then we always ask this question, that how this power and resources ought to be distributed in society. So politics and most of the philosophy that we deal in politics are centered on this question. So they are going to explain you, with their own context and times in terms of how, you should ensure that who gets what in politics, and how do you organize power and resources, how do you distribute them in the society, and because it is politics, so we can always agree to disagree with each other. And this is the reason that in political science, we have to read things from a very ideological perspective, because the scholars based in different ideology look at the same question from their lenses. That's why I always tend to say that in politics, you all have glasses which have different color, and it all depends on which glasses you are wearing, so that represents your ideology. So the glass that you are wearing is the one through which you are able to decipher an understanding about organization of political power, distribution of political power, distribution of resources. And this is where this whole ideology, your glass lens and their color become very, very effective. Okay. So if I go through the history, political philosophy's history, you'll find that the political science is understood as master science in the ancient Greek philosophy. But why it is understood as a master science? Because through political science, you tend to try to find an answer as to how you are going to make a better society. So, whatever is the status of the society at this point of time, your larger focus is on trying to find out that how you're going to make the society better, how and what you're going to do that is going to make the society better. Okay. So in the preparation of the PSIR, what all we have to study. So I've just given you a hint of the subfields of PSIR. But if I opt for a PSIR, then what are the areas that I'll be studying, as part of my preparation of the examination? So there are actually 2-3 very distinct subfields of PSIR. So one very distinct area is we have to study political theory. And theory is a very, very important building block of any discipline. So if you study the theory well, then you tend to understand the entire discipline better, because ultimately whatever you study in the discipline is an application or extension of the theories that you will be taught or the theories that you will be reading. Then another very, very significant aspect that we have to go through is the list of political thinkers that we have to read. That is political thought. And in political thought, we read both the Western political thought as well as the Indian political thought. Okay? So there is a very larger philosophical knowledge that one can gather by reading the insights of some very prominent scholars. So starting from the ancient era, so we have Aristotle, we have Plato, then we have Machiavelli, and then we read Locke. Then, if you move further, we are entering into the modern phase, and then we read people like Mill. There is Thomas Hobbes that one has to read, and then there are scholars like Gramsci, Hannah Arendt. So it's a long list of Western political philosophers that one has to read, not discounting a very, very prominent political philosopher in the form of Karl Marx. So we actually get to read all these scholars, and we try to understand their scholarships also from the point of view of the perspective of the political ideology that they want to espouse. Similarly, if you see the Indian political thought, we have to start it from the ancient era. So we start from the Smriti traditions. So there's Manusmriti that we have to read, and then there's the Buddhist tradition, there's the Arthashastra tradition. So these are the three major themes that one has to read from the ancient political thought in the Indian political thought section. And then we read some scholars, some prominent political scholars and their political ideas. For example, we read Mahatma Gandhi, we read Babasaheb Ambedkar, then there is M.N. Roy, so somebody from the left spectrum of political ideology. Then we have Rishi Aurobindo Ghosh. So these are some major political thinkers, and we also read Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. So you see that there are people from all spectrums who are like enriching even the Indian political thought part, because all of them have their own unique contribution to make in the study of Indian politics, or maybe some political ideas that they want to teach to us. So we are trying to read politics, but people who have read politics actually have read it from their own perspectives. So the Western plus the Indian philosophers that we are going to read will actually enrich our understanding of politics, because they have also tried to understand politics from their vantage point. And that vantage point is something that we should be aware of, so that we can make a better informed understanding of politics. Okay. Then we have a very prominent section where we have to focus on our constitution. So constitution again is a very important theme. So if you're reading political science, then the constitution and Indian politics, that's a very, very important theme that one has to be aware of. Okay, so we also say it as Indian government and politics. So that's a very, very important area where the bulk of the focus is on reading certain political institutions. So for example, we will be reading legislature, we'll be reading about the executive, we'll be reading about the judiciary. So these are like the important political institutions. And once we have read these constitutional organs that we are dealing with, then we come to the political processes aspect, where we are more interested into knowing about the Indian political processes, like the party system, how the party system is organized. Then we also tend to know a bit on how the Indian grassroots democracy through the Panchayati Raj, that has emerged in the post 73rd, 74th era. how federalism and what are the issues in federalism, how do we see the federalism evolving from the 52 to 2025, where do you see the center-state relations heading, both from the administrative, financial, political aspect. So there are so many changes that are constantly taking place, and one has to keep in mind. So we have to refer to the scholarly works to ascertain and put forward our views that how these different political processes are shaping the country's polity. There is also a special emphasis upon the planning and economic development, that has started from in the country since its independence, and how there has been a continuous changes in the planning processes and the developmental processes because of that planning processes that the country has been able to witness. A very important section about how you can relate to caste and religion, how these criterias would impact the politics. So caste, religion, ethnicity, and how are they impacting the Indian politics. So these are some of the areas where we have to be quite aware about. And then, we have also two other major themes that one wish to look at. So the two major themes after this is while reading it, we have to also know a bit on the comparative aspect of politics. So some of the major themes that runs or that explains the comparative politics. So we could say that in the comparative sections, we are trying to understand a very important concept, that is the concept of state. So how do you see state in the comparative literature? Because a state, and when you compare it in different perspectives, so you have to know that how the character of the state has changed. So state and its characteristics in a capitalist economy will be very different from the state and its characteristics in the socialist economy. Similarly, you also have to look at the state by comparing the state that exists in the industrialized West, developed part of the world, and the same state which exists in a developing part of the world, the third world part of the world. And then, we have to know in comparative politics about political representation, political participation, political parties, pressure groups, and how all of them play a crucial role as far as the understanding of politics of representation is concerned. And with this theme, we also have a very elaborate theme on international relations. So in international relation, the theme is very, very holistic because first we have to be aware about the theories of international relations. Okay, so the theories that we have already read in the paper 1 part. So now what we are going to do is we are going to read these international relation by using the ideas that we had by reading of the theories. So I'll be just giving you a more clarity when I just divulge with what all we have to read in the different papers. I'm just trying to help you understand that in PSIR, these are the major themes that we have to study. So when we read the approaches, when we read the international relations approaches, then so much of our training in paper 1 now will be replicated, now will be used in this paper, which is paper 2, that we are actually focusing upon. And then when we read the international relations, there are some very important concepts that we should know. For example, what is balance of power? How do you read that idea as balance of power? A very, very significant idea to actually understand international relations better. How are we going to understand the issue of national security, national interest? How do you relate security and power? So there are some basic concepts for this international relations theme as well. And once we go around reading this, we also have to know about some global institutions, both political as well as economic. So understanding of United Nations organizations, its functioning, what are the major demands that we see over there. Similarly, the operations of Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank, the IMF. These are like important areas that we have to focus upon so that we can understand the international political economy, that how the international political economy is managed by these global financial institutions and how do they impact the politics, the decision making. So we have to understand the politics of it, that is who is controlling how much and the decisions that are being taken in these institutions, who is the larger beneficiary in the larger scheme of things. So these are like political questions that we often ask to ourselves, and by analyzing them, reading about them, we tend to get our answers into these themes as well. Okay. So once we have done this part, then finally there is a very strong focus on the Indian foreign policy as well. So this largely constitutes the themes or the sub themes that our PSIR paper is inclusive of. Okay, so this is largely what we are going to get in terms of the knowledge for the preparation of the examination. So it is largely called India and the world as per the syllabus. So this is where our focus has to be. We have to like keep our focus on these particular aspect. If I just look at the syllabus, what I can do is I can just divide the PSIR into two papers. And in all these papers, if you see, for example, paper 1, so what sections would paper 1 constitute for me in terms of my study? So paper 1 will have a part A, and part A will have political theory. Part A will have Western political thought. Part A will have Indian political thought. Okay, so what is my primary area of study over here? So I'm actually looking at these three very specific themes, plus I'm also looking at political ideologies. Okay, so if I see political theory, I can actually focus on the concept of liberty, equality. So these are very, very prominent concepts that one has to be trained for. So how do you look at all these themes to better understand these concepts? So you are actually reading so many issues over here. So liberty, equality, justice, the concept of state, these are some of the major themes that one needs to look at when we are reading the theory. So we are also reading rights, a very, very essential segment to be done in this particular theme. Then, we are also reading about democracy. This is how the extent of the syllabus is designed. So it helps you prepare in a very better manner about all these theories, so that with all these themes, you actually tend to read the theories with regards to these themes. If you're reading justice, the syllabus says that you have to read it with special reference to the Rawls concept of justice, plus the communitarian critique of the Rawls theory of justice. If you are actually reading about the theory of state, then there are so many different liberal, Marxist, the feminist ideology through which you have to understand the concept of state, because as I said that in political science, one theme is not explained by only one set of ideology. It all depends that which lens you are using to look at a particular theme and how do you explain, because you have to explain it with the rigors of your own ideology. That's why if you're reading the concept of state, then the state has to be read from the liberal perspective, the neoliberal perspective, the Marxist perspective, the feminist perspective, the post-colonial perspective, the pluralist perspective. This is how we have to go around reading all these important themes in political science. For example, if you read equality, if you see equality, there is so much of a debate that is basically in the society, which is on the issue of affirmative action. So how do you see affirmative action being practiced in our country in the form of reservation? So you're going to find out an explanation of all these important ideas on the debates with regards to the equality, because equality does not mean uniformity, and we have to know equality from different point of view. That is, am I talking only about political equality? No, but I'm also talking about social equality. I'm also talking about economic equality. So, I'm also trying to understand the relationship of equality and liberty. And I'm also trying to understand equality from the point of view of reservation affirmative action. This is how you are being actually taught the PSIR optional, so that you can have a range of information which can be very, very useful for your preparation of the entire examination, not only the optional. Okay, but the optional is what we are right now focusing upon. Okay, then you also have to focus upon a very important theme. The theme is actually called power. Okay, so you have a very important theory of power that one has to look at. So hegemony, ideology, legitimacy, these are the themes around which you have to understand the concept of power. Okay, then there's a very, very elaborate list of ideologies. So ideologies would include liberalism, Marxism, fascism, Gandhism. So these are some of the major themes that one has to be quite versed with while they are reading political ideologies. है ना, तो ये सब बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट आइडियोलॉजिकल थीम्स हैं और इसी में आप ऐड कर दें फेमिनिज्म, socialism, all of this. They are part of the syllabus, where most of the ideologies are actually covered with the political ideologies as part of the syllabus. Okay. Then, as I said, you have to go through the Indian political thought. So where it starts from the ancient era, and then it moves up to the modern era, where you read people like M.N. Roy, where you read people like Gandhi, Ambedkar, Rishi Aurobindo, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, plus the Western political tradition, where you start from Plato, then you move to Aristotle, and then you have Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, John Stuart Mill, Gramsci, Hannah Arendt. These are the Marx. These are the major themes one has to know. So we tend to start our syllabus always with Western political thought. So we teach the philosophers first. Then after doing the Western philosophers, we read the Indian philosophers, and then we move to political ideologies, and then we do political theory, because many of the thinkers that we will be reading over here, they would be overlapping in so many different concepts that we are going to read in political theories. So this is how we'll be starting our syllabus, first focusing upon the political philosophy, the Indian philosophy, then we'll be reading the political ideologies, and then doing the political theories. And once we have done this part, in the paper 1, part B focus on Indian government and politics. That's where the part B paper larger focus lies. So they are focused on the theme. So it starts with a very historical theme. So, we have to know about Indian nationalism. So different phases of Indian nationalism, what was Mahatma Gandhi's political strategy, how, Gandhi moved from constitutionalism to mass satyagraha, so non-cooperation, civil disobedience. Then we have to study as well the different prevalent modes of political contest during the national movement, which was the revolutionary movement. And we can also say that one has to also go around and read the peasants and workers movement. So that's one theme on Indian nationalism. The other theme is we have to know the perspectives, that is different ideological understanding of Indian nationalism. That how, if you are a Marxist reading Indian history, what would you see as the major element of India's national movement? So a Marxist would see and say that India's movement is largely a bourgeois movement, because it was carried by the bourgeoisie, the elites of the Indian society. And therefore, they have kept the movement within their hands so that they could just diffuse any revolutionary instincts which was there in the Indian national movement. So, every ideology have their own way through which they would try to judge the Indian national movement. So we have certain themes through which we'll be reading them. So liberal perspective, the Marxist perspective, the Dalit perspective, the socialist perspective, the radical humanist perspective. These are some of the perspective that through which we will be trying to understand the Indian nationalism. Then, there is a discussion on the constitution making. So, the making of Indian constitution, largely the debate is about the Constituent Assembly, and it's basically an analysis, a review of the Constituent Assembly, and we'll be reading here that when the Constituent Assembly framed the constitution, then there are some criticism that is related to it, and we have to also know that how the British legacies played a crucial role into the framing of our constitution. So where could we trace those legacies? Okay, and within the Constituent Assembly, while we are framing the constitution, what are the different political, social perspectives that exist within the Constituent Assembly? So very interesting area of study regards to the Constituent Assembly. And then, we'll be actually reading the Indian Constitution, some of the major themes. For example, the very prominent theme of India's Constitution is to know the fundamental rights. That is part 3 of the Indian Constitution. So an understanding of fundamental rights, then an understanding of directive principles of state policy, a very comprehensive analysis, I would say, that we have to understand these features. And then you also have to focus upon some of the major themes like judicial review, the procedure of amendment to the Indian Constitution, all of them has to be dealt with in the syllabus. Okay, and a very important theme that runs through it is the basic structure doctrine. If you will see the syllabus here, this is very, very close to the GS paper 2 and the themes that we'll be reading in GS paper 2 plus the prelims part of the preparation of Indian polity. Then once we have done this part, which is the IGP constitutional part, then we focus on the government. So अब हम government पे focus करते हैं, and in the government part we actually talk about the principal organs of the government. So what are the principal organs of the government? So basically you study the principal organs of the government, both union government as well as state government. So what do you read over here? The theme is more or less very, very similar. That is, you read about the union legislature, union executive, as well as judiciary. So judiciary cannot be divided into union and state because we have a model of judiciary which is not thematically understood as a division between center and state. But what we can read over here is that for union we will be reading Supreme Court, and for the state part we'll be reading the High Court. So while union and state legislature and union and state executive. With this, we also would now read local self-government, that is grassroots democracy. So a theme quite popular these days because it leads to politics of decentralization. And what else can we see over here? Then there is a list of statutory bodies and their functions that we have to look at. So for example, we'll be reading the Election Commission of India, the Auditor General, the Finance Commission, the CAG, National Commission for Women, National Commission for Human Rights. So it's basically a list of statutory institutions, bodies, commissions that one has to look at. Okay, and then finally what we do is we focus now on the political processes. So party system, caste, religion, ethnicity. Then we focus on planning and economic development. So all of this, and then there is a chapter that is dedicated to social movements. So these are the themes that one come across while reading the first paper. So this is like the end of the first paper. The second paper, largely, if I say paper 2, I have to look at. So paper 2 would also be having two parts. So paper 2, part A, so it starts with comparative government and politics, Then there are international relations perspective that we come across, okay, and then there are some basic concepts of IR. Then there are a theme on global institution, so both political and some, we can say, financial. So we tend to read these areas also. So we will be reading UNO here, then we'll be reading the Bretton Woods institution like a WTO or a World Bank or an IMF. They're working, their analysis. And once we have done this part, then there is also a little bit of focus on a very pertinent issue that a student of politics should always know, that is about globalization. Okay. Then we also actually teach here some of the themes, especially with regards to some prominent institutions which play a very crucial role in the world, in the sense that these are the institutions where they are promoting regionalization of world politics. For example, European Union, for example, so they are, after globalization, we generally teach this because it makes more sense to us. So on the one hand, we talk about globalization, but on the other hand, we also see that there are so much of regional integration happening around the world, which is actually trying to give us a sense of regionalization of world politics. So EU, ASEAN, okay, similarly SAARC. So there are so many themes that one has to look at. Okay, NAFTA, North America Free Trade Area, all of this. This is a very crucial area where one needs to look at these basic regionalization theme of the world politics. Okay, and then there is a chapter that is dedicated to global concerns. For example, in today's world, what are the biggest concerns? So I would say that there are some very, very significant global concerns. Example, terrorism is a huge global concern. Human rights is a huge global concern. Democracy is a huge global concern. Environment is a huge global concern. So we have to read about all of this from the perspective of global concern, that how this has come to occupy a position of concern in the world as of now, and what can be done so that we are able to address the problems emerging out of this global concern. Even we can say the nuclear proliferation as an issue. It's a global concern. Okay. And once we have done the first part, then in paper 2, part B, you actually focus upon the India and the world segment. Okay. So actually here we are more concerned about India's foreign policy and also India's bilateral relation. Especially we are talking about regional, plus we are also looking at some of the global powers through which we are trying to understand our relationship. So this is largely the understanding of the syllabus that we need to undertake while we are reading the different elements of the syllabus. So if I see that why one should opt for this paper, so I would say that the paper actually has a coverage, and this is like I'm saying it from the understanding that we have about the examination, and I'll just try to briefly introduce that concept to you, that as far as the 4 studies, general studies papers are concerned, plus the essay paper is concerned, plus the interview preparation is concerned. In all these areas that are crucial for getting selected in the examination, these syllabus has a huge overlap. So starting with I would say GS paper 2. So if you look at GS paper 2, GS paper 2 has an entire, I would say, syllabus which is structured around the reading of the PSIR syllabus, which means if you see the PSIR syllabus and if you see GS paper 2, all the themes of GS paper 2 go hand in hand with the PSIR syllabus. So whether I am talking about the Indian Constitution, whether I am talking about the issues with regards to international relations, that is India and world. So what you see here is that what you call as the syllabus for Indian polity, which is both for pre and main plus India and the world, this is like a complete overlap of of the PSIR syllabus. If you have prepared the PSIR syllabus, these area is already prepared, okay, and you can always write a better answer than anybody who is simply writing an answer in the general studies, reading of the general studies paper. Yeah, because the approach to write an answer in the GS and the approach to write an optional answer are like two different areas. In the general studies, the approach to asking the question and the manner in which you answer the question will be a bit different from the questions which would be asked to you in the optional and the means through which you are going to give the answers in the optional. So, in the optional, it's mostly referential answers that you always tend to give, where you have to talk about the reference and how in that reference the author has discussed, through which you are using the points of the authors to make argument in your answer. Okay. So if you look at the GS paper 2, the GS paper 2 theme is barring the governance element, the entire paper is an overlap of PSIR. So what I'm saying is that you actually save immense amount of time for the preparations which has to be devoted for the general studies 2 paper as well as the Indian polity section for the prelims part, because you can actually complete the entire syllabus of the GS paper 2 barring governance and pre-Indian polity syllabus by doing the PSIR optional. So that's like one paper, a very, very strong linkage that we can find out. If you go and read the general studies paper 1, so what is the linkage that we get in general studies paper 1? So paper 1 have certain themes. Specifically, if you look at some of the political philosophies which you need to know in the paper 1, for example, if I say communism, capitalism, and socialism, okay, then effects of globalization on Indian society. So if you read these areas, all of this actually you are also reading in the political science. So if I see some of the political ideologies like communism, like socialism, or I would say capitalism, these are ideologies that you very elaborately and comprehensively read in your political science. Similarly, if you read the significant role of women and women organization, so women is a very important theme in PSIR as well, where you read about the women's movement. Similarly, if you look at the issue of communalism, regionalism, secularism, if you read political science, all of these themes and their understanding you can easily master. So even if I look at the general studies paper 1, I see that there is a very significant overlap with the PSIR syllabus. So in that sense, the question that I started my discussion with, that do you see that the optional that you have taken is very helpful in the preparations of the other elements of the examination. So what we are getting is that we are getting a reply in the affirmative. That is, there is an enormous linkage of the syllabus with the general studies part of the syllabus in the main examination. Similarly, if you look at the linkages of General Studies paper 3. So in General Studies paper 3, there are some elements of the question which is largely based on the issue of security, because you have an important theme over there, which is a discussion on some of the basic essential themes of internal security. So, for example, look at the spread of extremism. So, how can you link the development with the rise of extremism? Okay. Similarly, if you look at the non-state actors, so how is a non-state actor a challenge in the internal security? So non-state actor, very thorough reading we have to also make, especially with regards to the international politics theme, which is focused on security as well. So what you see is that there is an overlap of some of the concepts that we already have learned in the PSIR section, which is going to be of immense use to us when we look at the questions of security. So for example, terrorism, and how is terrorism posing as a threat, and how the security actually can be better equipped so that one can deal with the issues of such crimes like terrorism. You're also getting a lead where some of the basic elements of how to deal with the issues of terrorism, what the idea of terrorism is, a basic understanding of security challenges related to terrorism. So, you are well versed with the idea, and therefore that idea can be very handy when you are reading your paper 3 portions of those elements of internal security. Similarly, if you look at the paper 4, the ethics part, you have so many thinkers who actually overlaps over here. So philosophers, and you are always in a position to be better aware about the philosophers, and their understanding that you have developed because you have been reading the PSIR as an optional. So many of the thinkers and philosophers that would be very prominently used while doing the ethics portion of General Studies paper 4, that is also an overlap that we can make from the PSIR section. So what I'm trying to say here is that all the sections of General Studies are having some sort of a linkages. A larger linkage is still with the General Studies paper 2, but I'm saying that with all the papers, you will see that there are so many themes which would overlap, and therefore your understanding of the discipline can help you better prepare for answering the questions even in the General Studies part, which means that with the time that you devote in preparing your optional, with the same understanding of the optional, you are actually taking care of a very, very large weightage of the themes and topics that are part of the study of the General Studies. Okay. If I add your essay, then the perspectives which you learn in political science could be very, very crucial, because in the essay you always tend to get a theme which is basically a political theme, and being a PSIR student, you can have a very widespread perspective of answering a question. So you have so many dimensions through which you can look at a problem and then try to find a solution or an argument for that particular problem. So the training of PSIR also helps you answer the questions in the essays in a very, very comfortable manner with a very comprehensive coverage of so many different perspectives related to answering a question normally asked in an essay. And then, if you see the interview part, although interview is basically a personality test, but you can always expect a question which can emerge out of the themes of PSIR, because, everybody who is sitting in the interview board may also be reading newspapers, maybe all influenced by some contemporary events happening in the world. And as a student of PSIR, because you have a very different take and way of looking at so many events and incidents taking place in the world, local, regional, global, so that can be a very, I would say, essential part of your preparation, which could help you prepare for answering those questions way better than the others. So even when you come to address the issues with regards to constitution, with regards to anything to do with foreign policy or some of the themes related to ideology or theory. So generally, while we talk in the interview board, you more often than not come across these type of questions as well. So I would say that for the entirety of the examination, you always tend to get that political science helps you prepare better as far as the entirety of the preparation of the subject, which is the main part of the examination, is concerned. And PSIR can be very, very crucial even in the prelims part, with a very strong weightage of the Indian polity sections, which is asked in the prelims examination. So other than the optional that you are reading, all other aspect of the examination can also be one way or the other prepared through the study of the PSIR subject. Okay. Now the issue is that, is it like a utility paper in the sense that, do we see it's a popular paper because it is putting out better performances? So if you look at the results of the past years gone by, and even this particular year, you will find that it has been one of the most popular subjects, and it has given the first rankers. Sometimes the first two rankers are from the discipline. If you just go and do a conservative reading of that within the top 50 or top 20, how many students have appeared with PSIR? So you always tend to find a very healthy ratio of students opting for PSIR and qualifying the examination in flying colors. So I would still say that as a choice, PSIR is a safe choice in that regards, because A, it is very scoring, high scoring subjects. And when I say it's a high scoring subject, the point that I prove is by referring to the results. And there are so many toppers who have been able to top the examination because they have got a very, very substantial mark in the PSIR optional. Okay. That's why we say that people from different backgrounds, they're also taking up PSIR because of its utility in the examination, because of the kind of diverse and dynamic area it covers, which helps you prepare the examination better if you are a PSIR student. And I think the ratio of students opting and qualifying is so healthy that it has become one of the most popular choices in opting political science PSIR as a paper to appear in the examination. So I would still say that if I look at the general trend of the examination, it's on the healthier side. Now, what are we going to offer, as Drishti, to the students who wish to take PSIR as an optional? So the first thing is that, first and foremost, what we tend to do is that we have to have a time bound completion of syllabus, because your time is precious and we are committed to it as our dharma, that we have to complete the syllabus in due time. Then what we also ask you is that we provide you class notes in the form of dictation, some may be in the form of handouts, plus we have our own study material, and we actually do not ask you to read from any other source. So you have to rely on our teachings, our handouts, and we generally ask you that this is what is going to help you qualify the examination. Then there is also the periodic tests, and so it's like the tests are sectional plus the full length part. Then the teacher is always open to you for your questions. So we also believe in hand holding students who can always access to us, seek our time. We are readily available to them for their queries, and we try to resolve them. And it's not as if that we are taking their queries when they are our classroom students. We also tend to take their queries when they have already completed their course over here, unless and until they are finally selected somewhere. So, we do this part of hand holding where people who have a problem understanding and they have a question, so they can easily seek our time. And then, as teachers, we are always available with our own minds, so we can actually try to help resolve their problems. Okay, and we can also say that we have doubt clearing sessions, which are also designed specifically. So it is like periodic doubt clearing sessions that we take, both for offline and online students. And then, we basically focus so much on writing. So there is a regular answer writing plus the assessment. So I think these are some of the major ways or pedagogy, I would say, that we practice over here, so that the students who have taken our option, they have a complete understanding, of comprehensive, holistic understanding of the entirety of the syllabus. And we always tend to give that we could provide them with individual guidance if required, or we are always open for their questions even after the classes. So it's just that, there has to be the enthusiasm in the student. And as I said, therefore, there has to be an interest in the subject as well. Because the more interested you are in reading the subject, the more enthusiastic you would be. And that would then be, a combination which would help you qualify the examination. Okay, so, if I look at the overall ways in which I started my presentation right now, so I largely focused on first about that what are the questions that you should keep in mind before opting for an optional, and then I basically try to give you a bird's eye view of how the PSIR optional could be beneficial for the preparation of the examination. This is all. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.